Since Donald Trump took office at the beginning of this year, he has signed dozens of anti-immigration executive orders. I believe that these policy efforts can be understood through Christopher Hood's NATO policy framework, which is an acronym. It stands for Nodality, Authority, Treasure, and Organization. And so to briefly go through these aspects of the framework, nodality is the proximity that an actor has to other resources, whether it's think tanks, research bodies, things like that. An example would be Trump's Deputy Chief of Staff of Policy, Stephen Miller, who worked with him in his previous administration. Stephen Miller is going to be, if not already, partnering with quite a few right-wing policy think tanks, one called America First. And so we can see this nodality, these nodes of Donald Trump using Stephen Miller as a resource, Miller using think tanks as a resource, essentially to create a pipeline of information that suits the efforts that Trump is going to make. Next being authority, this one is simple to understand. A perfect example is Trump's rapid mobilization of ICE in major U.S. cities to collect and deport immigrants living in those cities. It is the authority to be in control, the use of force that a political actor might use in their policy implementation. Treasury is the money, it's the funding, the taxation, the incentive, the carrot, and the stick. We can see this through Trump's tariffs that he has placed on Canada and Mexico, which are, of course, bordering states. These tariffs were basically placed as a punishment for the country's perceived lack of control of their borders or their lack of compliance to what Donald Trump would like them to be doing with their borders. Finally, for organizations, this is outsourcing and delegating to private and public organizations. Trump will be using Amazon, Salesforce, and Facebook to assist in the technological needs of his deportation efforts, an example being facial recognition. And so a counter argument to all of this could be that Trump's anti-immigration policy efforts can be understood through Lowey's policy tool typology. And I do think that this can make sense. I even think that a lot of these typologies have similarities to the NATO framework. The typologies are distribution, regulation, redistribution, and constitutive policy tools. So like I said, these typologies share a lot in common with the NATO example. For distribution, you can see this in the treasure category. For constitutive, you can see this in the organization category. But I think a shortfall of Lowey, and the reason that I did not choose his typology to explain this policy effort, is that it's quite prescriptive, and these categories are quite broad. You could argue that a lot of different actions and efforts fall into each of these categories. And the main point of Lowey's typology is to understand the potential for coercion and degrees of coercion through each framework or type. So how might coercion happen through distribution? How might coercion happen through redistribution? And while Trump is certainly using coercion in his policy implementation efforts, I think that the idea of coercion kind of alleviates the responsibility on the other actors involved who are very much complicit in these policy actions. I see Lowey's typology as a sort of one-way view. It looks at the instrument or the tool that the political actor picks up and uses to implement their policy. What it's really missing is the two-way or multi-way relationships that have to exist between the political actor and whoever's at the end of each branch of the framework. So in order to understand the immigration policy through the nodality framework, we have to understand that the actors at the end of the nodality piece are also collaborating with Donald Trump. They are, at least on the surface, on his side and aligned with him. And so to only evaluate policy actions by the presence of coercion, it misses a lot of the actors that are happily involved and working as a team. There's a lot of teamwork happening with Donald Trump's policy implementation efforts. And I think there's a quote that sums this up very well from the textbook from Dodds, and it says that relationships between individuals and governing authorities are not assimilable to coercion and restraint. And this is just perfect because as we can understand all of the coercion that's happening through Donald Trump's immigration policy, but we're missing a huge element if we are only looking at coercion. We have to look at the camaraderie and the group efforts that are going on that not only make this possible, but might be essential for these efforts to be possible.